Welcome back to The Critical Gentleman. This video will be my last installment in the Baselworld 2018 coverage. I've showed you already some of my favorite watches as well as the most important releases I thought this year. I want to go down just a few more of what I think are the noteworthy pieces released, both in terms of what I liked and also in terms of what I did not. So stick around for another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. First up, we have a brand that I haven't talked about yet this year, and that's Nomos. Last year, I said that I was not terribly pleased with their announcement at Basel 2017, and this year they've done a much better job. I am a fan of Nomos watches in general. I don't own one just yet, but I think that they make excellent movements as well as very attractive minimalist designs. This year they announced two new watches, one of which is the Autobahn. Now, I personally think this watch is a little too sporty for my style, but I really do like what they've done in terms of styling it like a car gauge. The unique topography of the dial with its convex profile and concave subdials makes a very interesting appearance and, in my opinion, an attractive one. Interestingly, I read that it is a difficult dial to produce, giving Nomos a little more credit for innovation with this watch. In general, I give this a good. Next up is the Tangomat ring date. This is a new complication by Nomos, which in lieu of the ubiquitous date window chooses to indicate the date using a red indicator around the outer ring of the dial. This ring can be adjusted quickly using the crown to set the date. At first glance, I have to say this ring date complication is still the only date function where after inspection, you're still not totally sure what day it is. Next up is a brand that I have mentioned in almost every Baselworld video I've released so far this year, and that is Longines. Believe it or not, there are watches they've released that I have yet to mention. The first is not technically a Baselworld watch, but I have to make a video about it, and that is the Avigation Big Eye. This award-winning chronograph is not only attractive, but calls upon vintage military styling for its design. Its 41mm case diameter and automatic movement lend itself to everyday wearing, while its carefully considered dial and hands will satisfy even the most scrupulous collector. I find it interesting Longines has chosen not to use the false patina that we saw this year in Baselworld on both the Skin Diver and the military watch, which I'll talk to you about next. Instead, they've gone with superluminova and a modern dial treatment, which leads me to believe this watch is marketed to a wider cross-section of collector. So far, I believe that decision has served them well. Next, I would like to mention one more Longines timepiece, and that is, of course, the military watch. This is a watch that they released at Baselworld this year, along with the Skin Diver and the 36mm Legend Diver, and as a member of the Heritage Collection, we do expect it to take inspiration from an older watch. To that end, we have not only an attractive dial layout, but beautifully blued steel hands. Still, what fascinates me most about this watch is Longines' decision to employ a false patina on the dial, not in terms of the lume, but in terms of the actual speckling of the face itself. This is something that we have not seen before, and in a way could be considered an innovation. In another way, it could be considered an attempt to leverage the current trend that is collecting vintage watches. While the Swiss watch industry has been complaining for years that its sales are in decline, the market trend of vintage timepieces speaks otherwise. All one needs to do is look at the hammer prices of auctions around the world to realize that the vintage market has never been hotter. In fact, I'm hoping to cover this topic extensively in a video I plan to release next week. But now it's worth a footnote that this may give Longines a leg up in the modern market with collectors who otherwise would be enamored with vintage timepieces themselves. Next up on this list of noteworthy watches is the Tudor Black Bay 58. The only reason this watch didn't get included in the 5 best watches of Basel 2018 video is because it was edged out by the Black Bay GMT instead. Many of you even thought it would make my 5 favorites video, but next to the Oris Diver 65 and the Longines Legend Diver 36mm, I just couldn't make the room. That's not to say it isn't an excellent timepiece. Tudor created a brand new in-house caliber just for this watch in order to reduce both its diameter and thickness. At 39mm wide and just over 11mm tall, this vintage-inspired timepiece is not only a hit in terms of the design, but also the dimension. It's tastefully sized and nails all the details from the gilt dial to the absence of the date function. At approximately $3,500 MSRP, you really can't go wrong with this timepiece, and the only reason it's not on my list is because if there's a Tudor for me, it will be the Black Bay 36. Okay, so far this video has been about watches that I did like for the most part, but this video is called Good, Bad, and Ugly, so let's see. Last year I was able to garner a menagerie of dislikes when I critiqued some of the more esoteric timepieces to come out of Baselworld. I'm happy to say there were not as many disappointments this year, but a few nonetheless. I'll start with the watch likely to be most controversial, which is the Rainbow Daytona. This watch got great reviews from almost every blogger who saw it at Baselworld, but I just can't help looking at how gaudy it is. This is not something I would really ever want on my wrist or for people to see me wearing, and if anything is more of an art piece than an actual wristwatch. Considering they released a jeweled timepiece much like this one at last year's Baselworld, it really speaks to the lack of originality in terms of Rolex's design department. They've been making the same watches for decades, and it looks like they really have no interest in turning over a new leaf. Simply put, I could think of a lot better things to do with $92,000. Next up is the unfortunate lack of anything interesting from Tag Heuer. They're sticking to their guns with the sports watch pedigree and releasing 2 new colorways of the Monaco. At first glance, they register as a blip on my cool meter, and then I realize I don't need to advertise for the petroleum industry. They get enough of my money as is. I also imagine they would use digital watches in the world of Tron. As for Omega, I guess they deserve a pass this year, having released the 1957 trilogy watches last year and the 50th anniversary of the moon landing coming up next. I have no doubt that they'll release something interesting in 2019, but this year all we got was the Seamaster 1948. Now don't get me wrong, I really do like that timepiece, but their new colors of Dark Side of the Moon really don't interest me. Here's holding out for a sweet new Speedmaster in 2019. Finally, I'm venturing into dangerous territory here, but we got a few new watches from Patek Philippe because apparently salmon goes really well with a handlebar mustache. As always, please don't forget to subscribe if you like this video. Thanks for watching The Critical Gentleman, and stay tuned for my Q2 Market Watch coming up.